You make the point that this imposition of tariffs makes no economic logic. It doesn't make economic sense because we're now imposing sanctions on the U.S. by punishing with tariffs in order to make Americans more prosperous. Walk us through that idea.
Well, look, I think the biggest problem with the steel and aluminum tariffs is that, as a lot of people have been saying lately, and I think it's so true, for every worker in America who, produces steel or aluminum, there's 50 American workers who use steel and aluminum. And, we live in a global economy where there's global competition. If American auto manufacturers or motorcycle manufacturers or, the Caterpillar or companies like that are using steel, if their products are now more expensive because they have to produce it with more expensive steel, then we may actually end up losing more jobs than we gain. Look, I think Donald Trump's heart is in the right place here. I mean, I think he really does care about these steel and aluminum workers. And I went to a lot of these states with him, and I saw him interact with these folks, and he promised that he would, bring them more job security. But I wonder how many, American workers might lose their jobs as a result of this.
But was that explained, as you said, when you were out visiting these manufacturing plants?
Yep.
We're talking about 140,000 workers in the steel industry, the jobs that he's trying to save. As you say, his heart's in the right place. Was it explained to the president the implications for the 5 million workers that are involved in the user side of this equation and the impact that could have? Net, this could ultimately lose jobs.
Well, look, Donald Trump is not a conventional Republican free trader. He just isn't. And in fact, I would make the case that, and I am a free trader, by the way, and Donald Trump knew that when he asked me to be one of his senior advisors. He said, look, we'll just have to agree to disagree on this one. But I think that, one of the points that has to be made in Trump's defense is that, he campaigned on this all over the country. I mean, it's not as if this is a great surprise, right? I mean, he told the American people, if you elect me president, I'm going to get tough on trade and want to renegotiate some of these trade agreements and put tariffs on other industries. I think in this particular case, especially, I think it's misguided because, by the way, I don't have a big problem with being very aggressive in terms of penalizing China for a lot of its trade abuses and for its, enabling what's happening in North Korea. So you can't get tough enough on China. But what's perplexing about this is, as you guys have noted on this show, two of our major, two of the countries that provide a big share of our steel are Mexico and Canada.
Yes.
And they are not enemies of the United States. Far from it. Canada is our greatest ally.
Yeah, and China's not in the top 10.
No, and these are all really good points, Stephen. If these tariffs are aimed at one country, namely China, and its propensity to dump steel on world markets, what is a more effective way to push back against that, if not through these tariffs?
Well, Trump may think about very targeted penalties against China for its violations of the trade laws. And I mean, look, there was a report that just came out a couple of weeks ago that estimates $500 billion that the Chinese are stealing from the United States because they don't honor our patents and our copyrights and our technologies, and they just abuse them. I mean, that cannot stand. So I'm with Trump on that. But a steel tariff doesn't make a lot of sense to achieve that objective. I think the big issue, ladies, right now is where do we go from here? I don't see Trump necessarily retreating from this. I think he's a little bit surprised and shocked by the negative reaction of the markets. I mean, we've seen, I know it's up a little bit today, but the market was down, 500 or 600 points after he announced these tariffs. He's a guy who watches the financial markets. He watches them closely. He doesn't like to see them in the red. He likes to see them in the green. And I would like to see maybe, as you just suggested, and this is one of the suggestions we've made to Donald Trump, is, why don't you orient these trade policies towards the countries that are abusing the trade laws, not the countries that we are our closest allies?
But the problem is that might not work with the campaign promises, as you just mentioned. I want to go back to your point that you mentioned. What is the path here ultimately for the president to soften this stance, to back down? Because, my read of this is that he surprised everyone around him, whether this is a Navarro-led or a Lighthizer-led strategy. There are others around him, like Stephen Mnuchin, Gary Cohn, that simply don't agree with this strategy. So what is the path? Is it a tanking stock market eventually, if it's China trade wars we're talking about, or a Nafta collapse that ultimately changes his mind here?
Well, let me say this. I mean, certainly there was a lot of disagreement within the White House and the Trump economic team about this, and it was pretty split right down the middle. And Trump ultimately went with the tariff solution, which I think is the wrong solution. But, you know, I just heard you talking about NAFTA, and I got to tell you, I'm really nervous right now about where things stand on NAFTA. NAFTA has been, in my opinion, I worked on NAFTA in the mid-1990s. I worked for Ronald Reagan. This was his original idea of making North America a tariff-free zone, a free trade zone that would allow the North American continent to compete with Asia and Europe. And it has worked not flawlessly, but it has been very good for all three countries. And right now, you know, as you have Canada saying, well, maybe we're going to impose new tariffs on you if you have these steel tariffs. Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I'm worried about this tension building. And instead of tariffs falling, I could see, you know, the tensions get so hot that Trump just throws up his hands and says, we're out of NAFTA. It's not working.
Yeah,
and that would be a disaster. That would be a disaster.